In Romania, materials from Creation.com, Ken Ham, and the Discovery Institute are somewhat popular among Romanian Orthodox Christians in a very weird, the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of way. Do you have any knowledge of other countries where the USA exports or exported anti-evolution propaganda like that?
Well, if you look at Muslim countries, if you look at Turkey, you look at Saudi Arabia, those are the ones that I'm most familiar with. There is in Turkey especially, there's a vigorous anti-evolution movement, and it is wholly inspired by American creationists. The American Young Earth creationists from the Institute for Creation Research went to Turkey in the 1980s and spoke with Islamic scholars there and presented their point of view. And of course, the Muslims weren't that nuts about the Jesus part of it all, but they figured that it was perfectly useful to have somebody bashing evolution, which, interestingly enough, in Turkey is associated more with kind of modernism and Western hegemony than it is specifically with religion. Obviously, in Turkey, everything's tied up with religion if you're from that end of the political spectrum. But there was, there's an interesting syncretism there in Turkey that the anti-evolution movement is as much an anti-Western movement as it is a movement that thrives because of the conflict with religion. You also find creationism a lot in the former Soviet Union territories, countries, and in Russia. And that's partly because not so much of there has been an increase in religious adherence. But more than that, I'm told, it's that at the fall of the Soviet Empire, there was a great hunger to learn English. And of course, who are the people who are quickest to move into teaching English is the Protestant missionaries who are there teaching English, and of course they're also bringing their texts, and some of those texts are creationists, so people are picking up all this goofy science in addition to learning English.
Yes, a similar phenomenon happens in Romania with the Mormons.
Yeah.
They are not allowed to publicly proselytize, but they present themselves as free English teachers.
Yes.
And then you go there, and they invite you at the beginning of the sermon, and they say, well, after the sermon we'll go into those English lessons, and could you please stay? And you're kind of caught in that environment, and they say, okay, and then they, that's the bait. And then the switch happens. Okay.
Well, the other place where you find American missionaries succeeding a lot in spreading the creationism is in South Korea, because there have been a lot of Protestant Christian missionaries, and they're of a very conservative form of Protestant Christianity, who have been missionizing in South Korea for decades. There's something more of an increase also in creationism and conservative Protestantism in Central America and South America as well.
So, are there any institutions similar to yours in those countries where creationism was exported?
Not that I know of. There has, we get calls from other countries. We worked with some people in Italy a few years ago. We had, actually, 2005 was an odd year for 2004 and 2005. We had calls from Italy, from Serbia, and from the Netherlands and Brazil. And we thought, what is it? What's in the water? Why are we getting all this going on here? And then we haven't heard very much since. But alas, there could be a need for such, but thus far we're the only game in town. Of course, it's worse in the U.S., so.
Yeah, of course. I personally read, let's say, a book on creation science written very badly with factual and even worse orthographic errors by some Romanian creation science person. Are creation materials as bad in the US, containing orthographic errors and accepting the factual errors which are obvious?
I have a feeling it's quite likely that your Romanian book might have just been a translation or a loose copying of one of the many, 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 many books that is churned out by so many of the, there's whole publishing houses of creationism in the U.S. So this certainly is the case with the Turkish creationism. They basically are just taking wholesale from the American, and copyright be damned, they don't care about that. They just rewrite the stuff and off you go. So it might be quite possible. The creationist material varies considerably. The intelligent design material is rather more sophisticated in its production. Better production value, shall we say.
Yes.
And even the better young earth creationist materials are reasonably well bound, and it's good paper and brightly colored and all that. And it goes all the way down to pamphlets that are just produced by local people that are just totally junky.
Okay. What is the weirdest claim from the ID crowd you've ever heard?
Well, the thing that's interesting about the intelligent design folks is that they make very, very few claims. And that's their specialty. They learned that if, like the young earth creationist, you make a lot of fact claims, that you get nailed fast. So what they've specialized in doing is, and this is true of William Dembski's books and Michael Behe's books, really the movement hasn't changed much since those were published in the late 1990s. What they specialize in doing is looking at those areas of science that are still somewhat open. Origin of life is a biggie for them. They like that. The bacteria flagellum motor was a big favorite. And the blood clotting cascade and a few other items like that. And they focus on unsolved problems, where they can say, this is unsolved. It's so complicated, it is unsolvable. Therefore, we win.
Therefore, God.
Therefore, God. That's right. Therefore, poof.
Okay.
What's the single wackiest thing?
Let's expand it to creationism, if not ID.
Although the ID people are much, at least that was something new coming along the line.
Natural selection actually eliminated creationism, and ID is
Well, except that one should hope, except that, just like in real evolution, you have a descendant species, but that doesn't mean the ancestral species doesn't coexist for a long time. And more's the pity, the ancestral species seems to be perfectly vigorous and highly adaptive. The young earth creationist movement is still the larger of the creationist movements. The intelligent design people got more press because they seemed a little more respectable and they weren't making totally wacko statements. But they still are appealing to this fairly large core of American conservative Christians. What's been kind of fun is to notice the sniping that's taking place now between the two camps. That the intelligent design folks and the creation science folks are more from the creation science types, beating up on the intelligent design folks for not being sufficiently biblical. But I suppose something that is just wholly zany, that is just wonderful to contemplate, is flood geology. This whole wonderful doctrine from Henry Morris, which he stole, by the way, from an earlier Seventh-day Adventist who wasn't considered, Price was not considered quite legitimate enough because he was the wrong kind of Christian. So good old Baptist Henry Morris took over, and he really ran with this. But anyway, the idea that all of the sedimentary deposits of the whole planet, everything from Grand Canyon to the Himalayas, everything is the result of the receding waters of Noah's flood.
The deluge of water just actually carve the Grand Canyon.
Yes, that is a winner. That's got to be a keeper if you're talking about, creation. And the kind of stuff they use to, well, okay, first of all, when I wrote my book, Evolution versus Creationism, I wanted to present materials from the creationist literature, and then, of course, why they're wrong. And I was looking very hard for examples of positive arguments as opposed to what you usually find in the literature, which is, here's why evolution is wrong, we win by default. Mm-hmm. And so I was trying to find, well, are they making any arguments where they're saying that, here is positive evidence for creationism. And of course, it's vanishingly small. It's very difficult to find that. Vapor canopy or something. I found a couple of examples. But when you look at how they support this idea of the flood, and let's take specifically the catastrophic geological forces producing Grand Canyon, they'll look at areas like up in Montana. There's a very interesting geological area called the Channeled Scablands, sort of across Montana, Idaho, and into Washington, where back at the end of the Pleistocene, there had been a big ice dam that was holding back a very, very large quantity of water, probably as large as the Lake Michigan. Mm-hmm. And in fact, as the climate changed and the glaciers started to melt, this ice dam broke through. Mm-hmm. And there was, in fact, a catastrophic release of water across a very vast area of the northern plains there, and it just scoured the hell out of the surface. And you can see these scour marks. It's wonderful to look. Your listeners could Google Channeled Scablands and just look at some of these aerial shots there. It's really very dramatic landscape, and the topsoil was ripped out, and the sub rock was carved out. It was just trashed. And this happened like 20 times. I mean, there was many, many releases. Dams would freeze, dam up, release again, and so it just beat up. And their view, of course, is that Grand Canyon was similarly cut with a catastrophic release of water.
But in one shot.
Yes, it's Ken Ham, who is a young Earth creationist, has this wonderful. You evolutionists say that it was a little bit of water over a lot of time. Well, we creationists just say it was a whole lot of water over a little bit of time. It's the same thing. And it just makes you want to bury your head in your hands because, no, it's not the same thing. It's just not the same thing at all. I mean, if you look up at the Channeled Scablands and you look at at the remains the catastrophic geology leaves, it doesn't look a bit like Grand Canyon. Mm. I mean, and they're saying, see? And you just want to go, well, yeah, see? What are you talking about? You're nuts. So it's just, I must say, creationism is constantly entertaining. Just the goofball stuff that they come up with. Now, you realize, you completely realize, Eddie, that someplace sitting around a table, there are creationists saying, oh, yes. Can you imagine the crazy things evolutionists believe?
Yes, of course. You've talked about your book and about putting face-to-face evolution and creationism. Are there any future books or maybe plans on something, on working something which you would like our listeners to know about?
Well, there have been a number of people, a number of editors actually, that have harassed me about, I really should write an autobiography because I have such a unique job. I'm the only one doing this full time. It's such an interesting experience, and yeah, it would be kind of fun to write that up. I mean, mostly I'd be concerned about being sure that the history of NCSE gets covered, because it really is a very significant organization in the history of this very American controversy, which actually is starting to spread, more's the pity, but. So perhaps the kinds of things that we have learned and the sorts of experiences that we have had may be helpful for other people should And let's hope this does not become the case should creationism increase elsewhere as well.
Okay. Thank you very much for this interview. It was really interesting, and also your talk was really inspiring. Thank you very much again.
Thank you for inviting me. I enjoyed our conversation.